But I know it's exactly 7:23. But I said to myself, I'm going to come late purposely, and let's see if they can forgive me, given the topic of today's lecture. So I hope you can. Otherwise, please step out. And okay, all right. So I have to start with the story of a rabbi who was once sermonizing about forgiveness, same topic as tonight. And he asked the crowd, raise your hand if you can forgive right now all of your enemies. Only half of the people raised their hands. So he continued for another 10 minutes. He said, now raise your hand if you can forgive all your enemies. A few more people raised their hand, but still it wasn't everyone. He went on for another 20 minutes. Raise your hands, please. I hope everyone can now raise their hand if they can forgive all their enemies. Everyone raised their hand, except for one old lady in the back. The rabbi was stunned. He said, what? You can't forgive your enemies? She says, I don't have any. He calls her up. He says, wow, that's amazing. Maybe you can teach us a thing or two about forgiveness. Please tell us why you have no enemies. How are you able to forgive them? She says to the rabbi, well, I wasn't able to forgive them. I just outlived all of these idiots. But it's hard to forgive. I acknowledge it's hard for me. It's hard for many people to forgive. And I think Judaism speaks of forgiveness not just as a value, but also as a crucial piece of the puzzle of life. You cannot live fully if you cannot forgive. You cannot live healthily if you cannot forgive. You cannot live wholesomely if you cannot forgive. So tonight, I'd like to explore this topic, but not before telling you a story that I think epitomizes this value of forgiveness that helps us live. This is a story that occurred in 2011 with a man named Nachman Stitzer. Nachman Stitzer is a teacher in Modi'in Illit. Some of you are familiar with the town, not far from Tel Aviv, between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, outside of the Ben Gurion airport. But he's a young teacher, very Hasidic. If you see his picture, you'll see long payas. He has blonde eyes, big blue eyes, blonde hair, big blue eyes. Nachman Stitzer is a teacher in a cheder, a very ultra-Orthodox school, and every day he would take some of the kids from his neighborhood to that school where he teaches as part of a mitzvah. Nachman Stitzer would take very young kids. And I don't know if you know, but every year, unfortunately in Israel especially, we hear of children being forgotten in their cars. Just last year, I believe there were 170 cases as such, resulting in some 6 deaths. Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, I was just in Israel just a week and a half ago, and there's now an aggressive campaign to stop this plague everywhere with all sorts of tools. But in any case, Nachman Stitzer one morning, it was a Tuesday morning, he took some of the children that he would usually take to school, very young children. He makes sure all of them get out of the car, locks the car, goes, teaches for the day, comes back to the car with a friend that needs to go back to the same neighborhood where he's driving to. His friend goes into the car and shouts. Nachman tells him, what happened? He says, what happened? Look at the back of the car. He looks at the back of the car and he can't believe his eyes. He had left a young boy that morning in the car, in the scorching heat of the Israeli summer. There was nothing Nachman Stitzer could do. The boy was not alive anymore. The boy's name was Chaim Boimer. You can imagine the funeral. The parents were just exclaiming their shock, and they complained to God. In fact, the father, I saw a YouTube of it, the father was saying, I understand maybe why you want to punish me, God, but my wife is so righteous. Why do that to her? The grandparents shared the grief, but during the Shiva, something astonishing happened. the grandfather of that little child, Chaim Boimel, his name is Yisroel Lichter, he decides to make a call. Who does he call? Nachman Stitzer. And he says, we're here sitting Shiva for our grandson, that you were directly responsible for his death. I'm asking you to come. Nachman Stitzer doesn't know if this is real, if this is a joke. He says, are you sure? He says, yes, please come. You'll be our guest. He comes to the Shiva home. Yisroel Lichter, the grandfather, sees Nachman coming into the home. He immediately jumps from his seat and gives him the warmest hug he's ever had. Nachman can't believe it. He says, are you sure you want to welcome me? He says, of course. Why do you think you're responsible? They had him drink a cup of tea. They welcomed him as they welcomed their own family, as if nothing had happened. The Israeli TV that had heard about this story immediately went to interview Yisroel Lichter, the grandfather, who, by the way, runs a soup kitchen now for 30 years in Bnei Brak that feeds about 1,300 poor people each and every day. They asked Yisroel Lichter, how can you do that? Where do you find the strength, the courage to forgive the murderer of your grandchild? And Yisroel Lichter says, it's not that I didn't love my grandchild. My grandchild used to light up the room wherever he would go. And he went on to show pictures. You can YouTube it. But then he went to his library and he told the news reporters, come, let me show you something. He takes out a tractate of the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, and he reads the following passage right here. Following passage that speaks of a man who is cutting meat. And by mistake, as he's slicing the meat, he's cutting his left arm, his left hand. The Jerusalem Talmud asks a simple question. What is the man to do with this right hand that sliced the left hand? Should the left hand now turn around and slice the right hand in revenge, in punishment? No, it's the same body. And the Talmud, as here concludes, Ve'ahavta lera'acha kamocha, you should love your fellow like yourself. Yisroel Lichter says to the news reporters, you see, we are all one. And so powerfully he says, if I do not forgive him, I am not forgiving a part of myself. He is me, I am him. We are all one. Ve'ahavta lera'acha kamocha. So why live with hate towards a part of myself? Now, as I was watching that documentary about Yisroel Lichter and Chaim Boimel and Nachman Stitzer, and the story is a beautiful ending, maybe I'll share it with you afterwards, but I said to myself, wow, here's a grandfather who can forgive a man that was indirectly responsible for the death of his own grandchild, for Chaim Boimel. How small does that make me? How come I can't find the same bravery within me to forgive those that have hurt me? And I didn't have an answer. I really didn't have an answer. Now yes, there are exceptions to forgiveness in halakha. Some of the exceptions are also here in the second reference, and I apologize that, I hope you forgive me for that one too, but I apologize that there aren't enough reference sheets. But please feel free to share. V'ahavta l'ra'acha kamocha, you should love your fellow like yourself. So feel free to share, but there are two exceptions. One is that you can't forgive someone that has hurt someone else. So I can't forgive, God forbid, the Nazis, which is an extreme example. Why? That's not my job. It's really not my job. It's almost like General Schwarzkopf said. Remember General Schwarzkopf from the Gulf War, 1991? They asked him, can you forgive the terrorists? He said, my job is not to forgive them. That's God's job. My job is to make the meeting between them. That's my job. But, okay, we'll wait for the other ones to get it. But, that I can't do. They hurt someone else. Who am I to take this position arrogantly? and say, I'm able to forgive you on behalf of others. That's one exception according to Allah, according to the Mishnah. Second exception is that if I forgive someone, and he at least interprets this forgiveness as a sign of encouragement. Keep on doing what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing. That's wrong. That's also wrong. The person will continue to rob banks, will continue to harm people. So in that case, I'm also not allowed to forgive. These are the only two exceptions. But otherwise, forgiveness has to be a vital part of oneself. Because in Yisroel Lichter's words, if I do not forgive the other, some shape or form, on some level, I'm not forgiving myself. Because that other is a part of me. And you'll be living a life of divorce with the self. But on Yom Kippur, we speak of forgiveness. In fact, the Yom Kippur prayer, if you recall, begins with Kol Nidre, which is sung beautifully in many, many synagogues. Especially if the cantor thinks he has a good voice. Then that's why I said many, not all synagogues. But it's sung quite well. There's a typical tune to it. No one really knows the origins of the Kol Nidre prayer. By the way, many think that it came from the Marranos in Spain during the Inquisition in 1492, when the Jews would get together every year and say to themselves, 1 second, we acted as non-Jews on the outside. We want to make sure that God knows that that was just an act for us not to be caught and killed. So any vows that we have made as non-Jews should be annulled before we begin the Yom Kippur prayer, and that's how the Kol Nidre lyrics began. That's how they were composed. But Kol Nidre, astonishingly, is recited, remember how many times? 3 times. Now many ask the question, why 3 times? To ask forgiveness 3 times? So then why ask forgiveness 3 times? And there's a beautiful commentary by Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditcher, one of the great Hasidic masters, that says, well, that's because there are 3 different people we need to forgive. And tonight what I'd like to do is explore together with you those 3 people that we need to forgive, to allow forgiveness to really take part of our lives and make us wholesome. The first one, obviously, is forgiving others. Right? Anyone who may have hurt me, not others, but that may have hurt me personally. You have the Kol Nidre prayer right here. But I'd like to challenge you. Ready? I'd like to challenge you. Because I don't like speaking just in theoretical terms. But I'd like to challenge you that after this class, maybe you and I, including myself in this, can pick up the phone, one that has hurt us, and say, I'm sorry, or I forgive you. Could be anyone. But that's the first step in this Yom Kippur journey. The Yom Kippur journey that is not only left for the beginning of the year, but is each and every day, as we'll soon see. But in any case, the first person we need to forgive is the other that has harmed us. And I have to tell you that the biblical story that sticks out the most maybe teaches us on how to forgive others. I don't bring the references for this. But you remember the story that really embodies forgiveness in the Bible, in the Torah? Does anyone throw a wild guess? Joseph, that's right. Joseph was abandoned, was tortured by his own brothers. He is sent to slavery. He ends up in prison. For 21 years he does not see his own father, his own family. And when he's finally encountering his brothers again, he finds the courage to forgive them. Now why? How did he do that? I think there's a glimpse to that answer at the very end, when he reveals himself, probably the most emotional part of the Torah, no doubt. To me, at least, as a Torah reader, I get very emotional during that part. When Joseph says to his brothers, I am Joseph, Ani Yosef, and his first question, Od Avichai, is my father still alive? And his brothers are taken aback, and he says something astounding. He says, don't worry, I know you might think that I want to take my revenge, but you did not sell me here. Ki lo mechaltem oti heina. You did not sell me here. What happened then? They didn't sell him to Egypt, they did. And then he explains, no, God sent me here. You didn't sell me. God sent me. In a way, Joseph develops a whole new perspective to life. Very often you can see yourself as a victim. As a victim is passive. What do you sell? You sell items. I sell this table. I sell this chair. Those are very passive things. But people who are active are people who just do not allow themselves to be sold. Rather, the most active of all is the one that's imbued with God's life, with God's agency, God's almost task upon his shoulders or her shoulders. And that person sees himself as God's instrument of goodness in the world. I was sent here. I wasn't sold here. I was sent for a very specific reason. Yes, God, find my brothers behind that channel, brothers selling me, to be sent here. But I was sent here. My dear Rabbi Deitch Steinsaltz, he should have a speedy recovery. Yesterday he had a tough surgery. But Rabbi Steinsaltz used to tell us in his yeshiva, he would come very often and say, you know what the difference between me and the Breslev Hasidim is? We'd say no. And the Breslev Hasidim say that they grow their payas. All right? Part of the reason Rabbi Nachman said is that if they end up in hell, I believe it or not, but the Hasidic master, Rabbi Nachman of Breslev himself, would come and pull his Hasidim from their payas out of hell to paradise. And he would tell us, you know what the difference between me and the rest of the Hasidim is very simple. If you end up in hell, I'm not pulling you from anywhere. Rather, I'm going to come to you, I'm going to tell you, good for you. Now it's your task to make hell heaven. That's the difference. And that's the way to view life. Yes, we are sent different messages by different people, by different places. And the question is, are we viewing these as signs of God, maybe to direct us in becoming His instruments? Or are we viewing these as things that befall us and we're victims? We're harmed. It wasn't meant to be, it's not fair. Joseph shows us a new way. And I believe, yes, a better way. And I have to tell you the story, and I don't mean to be too long, but the story with an Israeli who had a son who was a Holocaust survivor, and he had a son who needed a new kidney. Now, he was looking all over the world for a new kidney for his son. Totally heard that there's a match for him, for his son, in Toronto, Canada. He schlepped to Toronto, Canada, and they scheduled the transplant in a week after his arrival. But the problem was that 2 days before the transplant was scheduled, he gets a call, and they tell him, we're terribly sorry, but the potential donor of your son's kidney has refused to proceed onward. He says, I don't understand. Why? This is my son's life. And he demands the phone number of the donor. They refuse to give him, and after a lot of persistence, he receives his phone number, he calls him, the man hands the phone in his face, says, I'm not interested in speaking to you, leave me alone, go back to Israel. So he decides to go and visit him, knocks on his door. The man sees him, slams the door in his face, I don't want to see you, go back to Israel. He says, but my son is going to die. Your son has a kidney for him, please. The man says, I don't want to speak to you, leave me alone. He says, fine, I'll leave you alone, just tell me why. And the man says, well, I'm surprised, you don't recognize me? He says, no, I don't recognize you. The man says, well, we were in Auschwitz together. You were a couple. And one day we were caught doing some illegal activities like stealing bread. So the Germans told you to come and beat us and to take away whatever we had. You took away my child. You took away my child? So I said to myself, what a coincidence. You took away my child. Your child now is about to die. I'll let him die like you let my child die. And the couple said, well, 1 second, was that you? Don't you remember? I was a couple on the outside, but on the inside I was still very much your brother. You think I took away your son to kill him? I actually hid him. And I fed him. And after the war, I was looking for you, and I couldn't find you. So I kept him as my own son. And I understand. Now I understand why your son's kidney, matches my son. Because they are brothers. The man couldn't believe it. But my friends, this is the case. As Yisrael Lichter said, we are brothers. Not forgiving the other is denying ourselves from ourselves. That's what it is. And that's why the first Kol Nidre is really dedicated to the other Joseph style. But the Babylonian Talmud says something quite wonderful. One who overcomes his natural inclination to hold on to a grudge and instead forgives others, all of his or her sins are forgiven. Why? Because you're wholesome. When you're wholesome, you're pure. Your sins are forgiven. That's the first Kol Nidre. The second one, dare I say, is forgiving God. Yes, we all hold grudges against God. We feel that sometimes life isn't fair to us. And we say, God isn't fair. Did I really deserve this? Did I really deserve this? And I find no better source than the letter written by Elie Wiesel, the famed Holocaust survivor, Nobel Prize winner, an incredible author. I devoured every book of his. But he wrote a letter published in the New York Times, Erev Rosh Hashanah 1997, on the eve of Rosh Hashanah. And there, after so many decades, he decided to forgive God. He said to God, yes, I've put you on trial in my books. I've declared you dead in my books. But I'm sorry. I thought to escape from you. But I could never do so. It's a beautiful letter. I don't know if you want to read it now or not. You can read it in your spare time. But it's really a beautiful letter in which Elie Wiesel concludes, well, there's no way we can ever divorce ourselves from God. God is forever present. There he speaks of how really the Holocaust was orchestrated by men, evil men, thought by evil men. And God doesn't feel needs to bear the entire responsibility. Maybe I'll just read the last paragraph where he says as follows: as we Jews now enter the high holidays, preparing ourselves to pray for a year of peace and happiness for our people and all people, let us make up, Master of the universe. In spite of everything that happened, yes, in spite, let us make up for the child in me. It is unbearable to be divorced from you so long. And it evoked in me the story of Rabbi Elimelech of Lizhansk, again another Hasidic master of 300 years, which apparently was approached by one of his students and said, the student asked Rabbi Elimelech, we're about to do kaparot. Remember the custom on Yom Kippur, where we take a chicken or a live fish or money, and we sing them above our heads. It's a sign of forgiveness, right? We ask God to forgive our sins. But so they asked Rabbi Elimelech, the student asked Rabbi Elimelech, please teach us how to do kaparot. Rabbi Elimelech says, I don't know what you want from me. I don't know. I do kaparot the same way you do. And in fact, you might do it just with the white rooster. I do it even with the black one. It doesn't matter. But if you want to learn the secret of kaparot, go to Moshe, the innkeeper in our town. Fine, the student goes to Moshe. He says, what do you want? I'm about to close. He says, I need to stay here for the night. It was kaparot night. And he wanted really to see how Moshe would do kaparot. He stays up all night, that student of Rabbi Elimelech. Finally, at 4 o'clock in the morning, he hears Moshe, the innkeeper, waking up. He goes to his study, wraps himself with a talis, and then takes out a list. In that list, which is a brilliant thing to do, it really is a brilliant thing to do, in that list, he had many, many, many listings of his sins throughout the year. And he starts to cry and say, God, please forgive me for this, please forgive me for that. Not big sins. Please forgive me for gossiping here, for not having enough concentration in prayer there. I wish I had those sins. But that long listing. And then he takes out another list. Another list that also had many, many, many listings. In that list, he listed the day and the time in which he felt that God was unfair to him. And he said, God, here you made my child fall down to the ground and break his leg. Here, God, you made my wife suffer. Here, God, we didn't have bread that day. Here, God, it's unfair. We don't deserve that. And then he took the two lists. And he said to God, look, I'll make a deal with you, God, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe. I forgive you for your sins. You forgive me for my sins. He threw those two notes in a small fire that he had prepared. He said, now I'm ready to start anew. And sometimes that's how we should approach, yes. Sometimes we can't understand. God is beyond understanding. The human brain can't understand the infinite brain of God. But we have to be willing to forgive God, if only to continue to live with Him with harmony. Dare I say, with love. That makes us again wholesome and maybe serene. And then there's a third person that we have to forgive, maybe the most important of all. Yes, more than forgiving God, more than forgiving others. We have to forgive ourselves. You know, I think that I'm about to write a piece, so don't tell anyone yet because I wanted to create weight. But called The Generation of Not Good Enough. Tell me if it's a good idea or not. This is really an idea I had 2 weeks ago and I have to write about this. But I'm thinking to myself that really, we're a generation of not good enough. As my generation, our generation, I think when we grew up, we weren't good enough for our parents. And now we're not good enough for our children. And in so many realms, we're really not good enough. And we blame ourselves for so many things. You'll read my piece and I'll delve into this topic a little more. But we're not good enough. And when we're not good enough, it's hard for ourselves to forgive ourselves. It's really very, very hard. And it's true on a Jewish level. Very often as a rabbi, I have people come to me and say, you know, Rabbi, I'm not a good Jew. I didn't have my bar mitzvah properly. I don't eat kosher. I'm not a good Jew. Or people would say, I am a good Jew. And we define ourselves by good or bad, which obviously leaves a lot of grey room. A lot of grey room in which the vulnerability of man is so strong that he doesn't forgive himself. By the way, I say that there's no such thing as a good Jew or a bad Jew. Never say that. And if someone says that to you, please correct him. Correct him by saying, no, there's no such thing as a bad Jew, there's no such thing as a good Jew. There's only one definition. No, not even a Jew. And the only definition is a growing Jew. If you're a growing Jew, no matter what your level is, if you're taking a step forward, you're the ultimate Jew. That should really be the only definition. Not a good Jew, not a bad Jew. But we blame ourselves really for so many things, which reminds me yet of another story. A story of, I may have shared in the past, but a story of a young child who was missing his left arm. He was missing his left arm. But his mother insisted to treat him like a normal child, like all other children, and his school classmates would go to judo lessons. So she says, my boy, you're also going to judo lessons. Fine. The teacher sees him and says, I don't know what to do, but I'll teach you one trick I know. He teaches him for 3 months to master this trick, and he says, I can't continue with it. He says, please. So he continues to teach him that same trick. A year later, there's a tournament. The student says, I want to go to the tournament, but you only know one trick. He says, that's fine. And the master says, you know what, I think you can actually win. So he goes, the first round he wins, the second round he wins, the third round he wins, the quarterfinal he wins, the semifinal he wins. With that one trick, the finals, what do you think? He wins, of course. It's got to be a happy ending, right? Hollywood style. So he wins. No one could believe it. They go to his teacher, sensei, how did you do it? And the teacher says, you don't understand. In judo, there's one move. That the only way for the opponent to defend himself against it is to grab the other person's left arm. But he doesn't have a left arm. So it's indefensible. And that's how he won. Friends, we live in a world where we only see bodies. We don't see souls. We just don't. But imagine for 1 second that we lived in a world in which we saw souls only and not bodies. Could there be a soul that could hide his or her blemishes? Could there be a soul that could say, I'm pure, I'm wholesome as the day I was born? I don't think so, exception maybe of the righteous. But the question is, how do we treat our missing left arms? That's the question of life. If we are to blame ourselves all the time, you're good for nothing, you're wasted, you have no left arm, that's a path for self-destruction. But if we say to ourselves each and every day, we're born anew, and yes, we might be missing a left arm, but it might be to our advantage, as it was in that tournament. We might be able to transform it. Then we have lived a life of growth. Then we can be growing Jews. That's the key to life, the key to forgiveness. Yes, we're harmed. Yes, people attack our left arms, make wounds all over the place. But the question is, so what? Really, so what? And not only that, but maybe it is able to spring us forward. Those very hurts, those very pains can be used really to make us grow. I think you name a hero that's achieved something, you'll find that there was a moment of vulnerability in their lives in which they said to themselves, boy, we have this weakness, but we'll galvanize it to become better and to spread our light. Those moments made them the heroes they are. And it's the truth for every aspect of our lives. And I have to tell you the end of this story. Chaim Boimel, alav hashalom, was very dear to Nachman Shtitz's heart. Yes, he was facing a 3-year term in prison, which was commuted, thank God, because Yisrael Lichter went to the courthouse and demanded that the judge does not put him in jail. It was commuted to 6 months of community service. But a year later, Yisrael Lichter and Nachman Shtitzer founded an organization that helps increase the awareness for these tragedies in Israel. When I was there just 2 weeks ago, I saw their names on those campaigns. But the story goes even further. Nachman Shtitzer did not just take his missing left arm and transformed it as a source of light for the people of Israel in the state of Israel. But personally, he had a baby boy. Do you know what he named him? Chaim. You know who was the Sandak, the godfather at the bris? Yisrael Lichter, the grandfather. Because, my friends, when we learn to forgive others, our life is enhanced. Our life is enhanced in degrees that are truly unimaginable. Perhaps this is why we say the Modeh Ani each and every day, to say to God, yesterday's troubles were yesterday's troubles. Today we're starting anew. And we're using everything in the past as a springboard for growth. And then we too, I promise you, will have children, spiritual children, will create goodness and kindness in the world. And our darkness transformed into light will illuminate the world. I thank you. Okay, I'll take question. I hope you can hear me like that, because I can't forgive the microphone. Yes.
Can you forgive someone but still choose not to include them in your life? Is that true forgiveness, or is that taking care of yourself? But I know real forgiveness. It's over. It's done. I forgive you, whether you ask me or not.
Right.
But I choose not to have it in my life anymore.
Well, that's an excellent question. Maybe I should just to repeat the question. So, can you forgive someone but choose to not include them in their lives? You know, there's a limit. Not everyone is Yisrael Lichter. Right? That's what you're asking. So, yes, I mean, definitely. But you have to ask yourself an honest question. Did you really forgive him? Why is it that you are not including them in your life? Sometimes it's simply because you feel that you are too different. That's fine. That's all right. No problem. But, yeah, forgiveness doesn't mean Yisrael Lichter necessarily. Yeah. Yes, Randy.
So the story about the boy that was left in the car, would many people think, I mean, well, it's not really his fault because it was God wanted that to happen. I mean, people that believe that everything that happens in the world is based on God, how does that play into that?
That's a child's question. But people that believe that everything happens because God had planned it to happen. So if that boy was left, I will tell you this. The only way to answer this question is by evoking the words of Rabbi Yekutiel Yehuda Halberstam, the Tzanzer Rebbe, who too was a Holocaust survivor and saw his own wife and 11 children murdered in front of him. He had found the courage to rebuild his life after the Holocaust, built a children's hospital in Netanya, Israel. We've spoken about it many times. But Rabbi Yekutiel Yehuda Halberstam was asked a similar question. He was asked, where was God in the Holocaust? It's unfair. Elie Wiesel was also asked a question, and he responded also brilliantly. He said, you're asking me where was God in the Holocaust? I'm asking where was man in the Holocaust? That's the real question. But Rabbi Yekutiel Yehuda Halberstam answered differently. He said, look, I have many questions. I have many personal questions too. Now I'm sure that if I really wanted, God would invite me to the heavens and give me answers to all the questions I have. But I prefer to remain down here on earth with the questions and go up to the heavens with the answers. We'll always have questions. Not everything can be explained. Those who say, well, those soldiers were killed because they didn't keep Shabbos. They either need a psychiatrist or they fought. But I don't believe in that way of life. I don't think that's healthy. I think it's healthy. What is healthy is to say, as Prophet Isaiah says, Lo machshavotay machshavotechem. Our thoughts are not God's thoughts. Our brain is limited. We have to understand God, but there will be areas that are inexplicable. And we have to remain with the questions, unless some of you want to go up to the heavens and receive the answers. But I prefer, like Rabbi Yekutiel Yehuda Halberstam, to remain here on earth.
I noticed it, because I love it came back to testify.
Yes, Diane.
Thank you, Rabbi. Great talk. Mine relates to the first question that the lady had in front about keeping somebody in your life. If someone is a family member, not an immediate family member, but an aunt, cousin, or in-laws, for example, and you forgive them, but they continue to do destructive things to you that's hurtful, you mentioned at the beginning of the talk that there's two different kinds of people you don't need to forgive. Is at that point you don't forgive them, or you forgive them and don't have them in your life? Or how do you handle people who just continue to do the same things to you?
That's also an excellent question. How do you handle people that continue to harm you? So you might forgive them, but they continue to harm you, and it's hurtful. Look, I'm a believer that good fences make good neighbors. I do think that if the neighbors are just toxic, then good fences make good neighbors. But I want to speak about forgiveness from a very essential standpoint, even from a personal standpoint. Forgiveness relates to my perspective on the others, not necessarily on their, how should I say this? Forgiveness relates to me versus the others, Not necessarily, I don't know if you can understand, but I'll explain. Not necessarily, it doesn't relate to on the others versus me. So what I mean by that is that when I forgive, what I'm saying to myself is that I am remaining wholesome. Nothing is going to crack me. Okay? If I constantly think of the other, now yes, you have to have good fences, but if I constantly think of the other, and as many have said, I've seen that in many books, but they rent the space in my mind for free. I'm sure you've heard that sentence before. Then it's the others versus me, and then that's when it becomes toxic. But if I'm able to build those fences and say, you know what, they'll continue with their actions. They'll do what they want to do. But I'm above that. And yes, means that I won't have to interact with them. It means that I don't have to interact with them and so on. But I'll remain above that. Then you've exercised forgiveness at its best. But you can't allow those actions. Yes, you have. So my answer to you is you have to create those fences. You have to make sure that the distance is healthy enough for both sides, especially for your side. But you shouldn't be thinking about that all the time. Let it go beneath you, not in you. Which is hard. But just one more thing, and then I'll take the answers. One more thing. Look, I often use this example. In 1981, if you remember, I don't. I was 2 years old. But in 1981, Ronald Reagan was almost killed. Remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. So it made some headlines in the newspaper. But I researched it. At the time he was killed, there was something in America that made greater headlines. Much greater headlines. Do you know what it was? Apparently Philadelphia had a strike. They wouldn't collect the garbage. Remember that? For 3 weeks, the garbage men did not collect the garbage in Philadelphia. That drove the country crazy. Crazy, more than Ronald Reagan's attempted assassination. Now I'm thinking to myself, we too collect garbage. Sometimes not for 1 week, for 3 weeks. So how come we don't have this uproar that there was in America in 1981? So much garbage in here. And all we have to do is just sweep it away. Don't let it even come, don't even collect. Just don't let it amass. So sometimes the best way to relate to those neighbors is to, I'm above this. Everyone continue, let it be. But I'm not collecting garbage and letting it sit there. It's just toxic. Okay. Yes?
So you talked about the first 2 repetitions of calm denigrated. So what is the third repetition signify?
So the first one is forgiving others. Second, forgiving God. And third, forgiving oneself. Yeah. Which is the one you sang on Yom Kippur.
Second one.
Oh, you sang the second one. That's right. Very good. Yes?
I know this is in memory of the 3 boys, and I live in Israel also, and I live also here in Scottsdale, and I knew the Frankel family, and I know that you have worked with Rachel Frankel. Can you tell me how she is doing with the forgiving part?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that because it answers a question that was asked before. I just met with her a week ago, and she said something she didn't say here during a visit. She visited our community 2 years, but she said that there are many why questions in her head. Racheli Frankel is the mother of Naftali Frankel, who was abducted a year ago in the past summer and murdered brutally, one of the 3 boys. But she says there are many questions of why. But she does not allow herself to even go there, because it will put her in a state of complete desperation. So she blocks them. And by blocking them, she said, I'm a happy person. Really remarkable. Really remarkable. She's amazing.
She doesn't stop smiling.
She's amazing. But I have to say, I'm sorry, but because I know people say she's amazing. I say she's amazing. She's truly remarkable. She's amazing. I don't know, people say, I come from a world, a yeshiva world, in which every second rabbi is amazing. And it's always bothered me. And I'll tell you why. Because by saying that they're amazing, we make them inaccessible. Not only that, we make them as a category of themselves, They can't really teach us that we can never become like that. They're amazing. We're not. So saying that Racheli Frankel is amazing is true. But it doesn't mean that you can't say, well, we can learn from that too. We can also block the why questions. We ought to. That's what she wants, by the way, not the first thing. So we got to be careful with just putting people in boxes, making them inaccessible and categorizing of themselves, because then they really can't teach us much. It's the cookie cutter philosophy of some parts of Judaism which I disagree with. That's why I love Noah, the biblical figure, who wasn't a tzaddik. He was a tzaddik, but according to another opinion, he was only a tzaddik in his generation, not in all generation. But there's a whole parsha named after him. Are you going to name a whole parsha named after a non-tzaddik? Or a tzaddik only? Yes. You know why? Because he can teach us much about ourselves. That's the people we can relate to. So we have to say they're amazing, and we're learning from them.
But that's it. That we ask what makes them amazing, and we can provide back to that amazing, right?
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
I just want to say, as a mother who lost a child, after a while, you just don't even ask why anymore. It's just, that's the way it was, that's the way it was supposed to be, and there has to be a reason for it, but I don't know the reason.
Yeah, that's... Well, first off, my deepest feelings and wishes to you, but I'll tell you this, my wife also lost a brother. And at a good time, I once asked her parents that lost a son, and they dealt with it. And I'll never forget what my mother-in-law told me. My mother-in-law that I love dearly told me. But she said...
That's not what she said.
She's crazy like it.
No. She doesn't like me?
She
Okay, well, I love her. It doesn't matter. But I once asked her, how did you cope with it? How do you still cope with it? And she told me, quite remarkably, she said, well, number one, I still think that he's alive. And that his soul is alive is very much present in my life. It's also remarkable. But number two, she said, I cry often at night, and it breaks me. But I pick myself up and I get up. Which is, by the way, very similar to what Racheli Frankel said about herself. Life is stronger than my tears. Life is stronger than my tears. Yes?
You speak about the grandfather forgiving. What about the parents of the boy that was in the car?
The parents of the boy that was in the car? Good question. So they showed, in that YouTube, in that documentary, they showed the parents, they showed the father only, the mother, but I think it's because it's an ultra-Orthodox, so they don't show a woman. But the father forgave just as much, which is also remarkable. They don't focus on him too much, but he forgives, he says that. Yeah. Yeah, Sean.
I just wanted, you now, I'm a huge fan of you. Everyone that don't know you in this room, you're just so accessible. You're young in your years, but you're a wonderful soul, and you're completely accessible. And you inherently, every rabbi, every rabbinical school should model.
Thank you.
students after.
I wish my mother-in-law was here to listen to that. Maybe that she was.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Amy, thank you very much for organizing this.